All right, welcome back to the Nexus Podcast. I'm very excited to have Ron Fabela join me today. Ron gave a fun talk at the recent S4 conference in Tampa on covering the activity of a handful of low-skilled OT/ICS threat actors. He kind of dissected their true technical capabilities versus really their marketing ability. So it was a pretty interesting and insightful talk with a lot of real world examples. And I'm definitely glad that Ron is here to guide us through some of the myth versus reality about some of these groups. So before we start, just my regular pitch to subscribe to the podcast. It's really the best way to keep up with the lineup of guests I've got coming. I've been really fortunate to have some of the best folks in cybersecurity give me some of their time. We're actually closing in on 100 episodes as well, so very cool, very exciting stuff. We're on all the platforms, whether it's Apple, Spotify, Amazon, you name it. So subscribe if you already haven't. Really appreciate everybody for listening. So let's get this started. Hey, Ron, how you doing?
Hey, Michael. Well, thanks for having me on the show. I don't know if I'm dating myself, but a longtime listener, first time caller. So
sounds like sports radio.
That's right. No, and it was a fun S4 conference. This is a topic that I'm passionate about, not overly so. I track these folks almost like, again, dating myself, sitting down with the coffee in the morning, looking at the police blotter and seeing what idiots did the night before. So I kind of wake up every morning, open up Telegram and go, oh, look what these guys did. So happy to discuss it further.
Telegram's the place, right, for most of these groups?
It is, and it's kind of not weird, right? We all have our biases and bubbles, and I don't see Telegram being used much in the U.S., but it kind of like WhatsApp, it is prevalent in Europe and Asia and other places, and so yeah, they kind of just use it as their marketing arm, right? Some of them have Twitter accounts, but most of the time they're just kind of shit posting on their Telegram channels about all the cool stuff they did. And there are some folks like me who read it in the U.S. and even more so now. There's some groups or tracking groups that will then repost or rehash those things on other social media platforms. So over the past few years, they've gotten some more exposure. So I felt it was time to maybe out them a little.
Yeah. I mean, one thing about APTs, or at least some of the advanced groups, they don't publicize a lot. It's kind of the point. And these guys are out there with some of their exploits, as I'm sure you're well aware.
For sure. And I always like to start out with anything that at least I say, or even the community, biases are not necessarily a bad thing. But to your point, one of the biases is that, well, these are the public-facing groups that I follow, and they're only going to talk about the public things that they want us to know. So, yeah, I mean, my title was Deep Dive on low-skilled threat actors, and then my extended title was, tracking advanced actors who aren't really advanced. They're just skitties that deface PLCs and have bad manners, and they don't know the difference between Arkansas City and Arkansas State. But that is my observation bias, right? Mm-hmm. Maybe the advanced guys are in secret channels that none of us see, but again, we don't have that data. So
right.
Kind of just a fun expose on what I've been tracking for the past year and kind of having some laughs around it, right? We tend to not necessarily overblow, but maybe overexpose what these criminals are doing to the United States water system or whatever. And it's fun to actually look at the details on what they're actually targeting and doing.
Because, I mean, a lot of these are just defacements or intrusions and a very limited scope, right?
Right. Well, and part of my discussion and more of an education drive is that when you read about this stuff in the news, so earlier last year, it was the Texas water utilities, right? Or the West Pennsylvania town that I can never pronounce, right? I don't know. I won't even try it. But it gets a lot of exposure. Maybe CNN picks up on it. CISA puts out a joint report. And us in the community just read that and go, oh my gosh, like stuff's happening. But they don't necessarily know how to get to the source data and see for themselves. So the big thing with this kind of very short presentation was this is all on Telegram. You can all see for yourself. Go watch their videos and determine whether they're advanced or not. Like, don't even listen to me on this. And But once you do look, you kind of have to sit back and laugh because you're like, they're just kind of just idiots on keyboards pressing buttons and turning pumps on and off, hoping that something bad happens. Um, and that was kind of the crux of my output was if we just look at the public data we have and the videos they provide, they don't really know what they're doing. And thank goodness they don't.
True.
Yeah.
Is there any kind of motivation for behind any of this, or are we just kind of feeding some sort of craving for attention and creating these monsters as, whether it's media or vendors or CISA and stuff? I mean, like some of them have to react. CISA
Oh,
has
yeah.
to investigate, it's.
Well, especially when it hits the public eye and when some of these events hit what I call like the kitchen table conversation. So, we can kind of thank groups like Cyber Avengers where they do a higher profile attack, and they get us more community exposure and conversation than really the security community has been trying for years and years and years to just say basic things like, don't have your PLCs hanging on the internet. They shouldn't be discoverable on Shodan. And we've been towing that line because it's good, kind of clean requirements or advice. But man, Cyber Avengers came through early last year, defaced a whole bunch of PLCs, and got us more movement on that front than I think we have. So,
Mm-hmm.
what does that say about the security community? But with this one, the reason why I have to be careful, I don't want to say I loved this event, but I appreciated this event because it felt old school. They just literally replaced the HMI background. And just some nerdy details. They specifically targeted Unitronics PLCs, which are like an HMI PLC combo.
Right.
Actually, Team 82 did some great research on this, on kind of the underpinnings and the technical part of this. But just to summarize for the listeners, this felt like an old school website defacement. They put up their "You've been hacked by us," it's all in red, but they put their intent. Every equipment made in Israel is a Cyber Avengers legal target. So if we trust what they say, which I have no reason not to, this was a geopolitical motivated attack. It's not that necessarily they were targeting U.S. water infrastructure or targeting, I put a picture of the brewery that got, hit with this defacement. And the joke was, well, is beer critical infrastructure to the United States? Well, maybe to some of us, but nationally, not so. And but
That
yeah,
attack seemed to upset more people than the water attack.
well, right, and as you get into the kind of the broad reach, and then maybe the observation or the focus bias by our groups like CISA and the government in the U.S., you kind of say, well, did they really target U.S. water infrastructure? Well, no, they targeted anything that was running this Unitronics PLC.
Right.
And what they left out, because again, it's not in their area of responsibility, was, the weekend that this was happening, I found 5 dialysis machines in Brazil running this software, and they were hacked. But nobody really came out and said, oh, the Iranians are specifically targeting the health and medical infrastructure of Brazil. And so that's really the outcome was government has to respond to these things. But if we, as the community and as analysts, are informed with the base data, we can determine what this means to our infrastructure or our area of responsibility. And that's what's really important.
And I know you didn't cover just the Cyber Avengers in your talk. You talked about Russian Cyber Army, UserSec, a couple other groups. Mm-hmm. Just a general question about script kiddies. Have they changed much in the last 15 years? What are some of the characteristics that you're seeing today versus, 2005 script kiddies or earlier?
They've gotten really good at marketing. The joke is like when you watch the Cyber Army Russian Reborn and their videos, it's like they have a Canva Pro account, right? Like they have the intros and the music and they have logos, and like you really got to hand it to them. Like they do sometimes better marketing than vendors and consultants do. And maybe that's part of the difference in the presentation layer of what they're doing, but the technical layer is still the same. So again, dating myself for the third time, I remember way back whenever there was a geopolitical upheaval, and I remember the old May Day attacks. This was maybe 98 or 99. but there was some intelligence or airplane incident in South China Sea, and the Chinese hackers and the American hackers went and defaced each other's websites, and they would put up these patriotic things like "down with China, down with the U.S." Um, but that's where it really ended. It was a defacement of a web page. Down with China, your security stinks, and shouts to my friends was always the kind of the three, and some scary picture.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's like production values is great, and the social media, the influencer aspect has increased, where maybe it's just because of the times we live in, access to tools, but you can't help but wonder if, like influencers, one of their major, objectives is to more market to the industry than to show technical prowess.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the other takeaway I wanted for the S4 audience and the audience in general, was that these aren't advanced things. It's nothing that you should be scared of. But maybe the thing that we should have pause and caution on is the motivation and why. And if there's still so much low-hanging fruit out there, then that kind of just reflects poorly on us.
Mm-hmm.
And that was really at the end of watching these folks for a year, I kind of took a step back and went, wow, where have we failed in the security community, and matching that level of influencer with our small water utilities, with our munis and co-ops, with these folks that continually get attacked by these groups, but yet also tell us this isn't a big deal. It's a nuisance from an
Yeah.
operational stance.
But that's what's kind of bubbled to the surface, though, at least between the lines, that, we're still directly connecting PLCs to the internet, or, lousy default passwords or whatever. It's basic stuff versus some, 0-day or whatever.
Yeah. Well, in basic, even, 10 years ago when we talk about Shodan, it was like, ooh, that was like the dark web, right?
Yeah.
I even worked with some government folks. They said, I don't even feel comfortable going to that web page. I'm like, okay, guys. But as these things get more comfortable, and even with the audience I spoke to at S4, not many hands went up when they said, oh yeah, I have Telegram on my phone. So as you demystify these things, then they become less scary, more manageable. And yeah, I mean, they are not even scanning anymore. They're not even, they're using Shodan, or they're using other things to just enumerate and find them for them. And they're simply just logging into the systems. With cyber vendors, again, to keep punching down on their technical capability, because I don't mind doing that. The Unitronic system has an app you can download to connect to it, like a phone app. So this isn't exactly, yeah, I mean, this is something, at least when I was tracking it, I have a ton of kids at home, and I was teaching my teenagers, like, hey, download the app, let's go see what's out there. And it's that level of access that I think, I don't want to say act like I'm not mad, I'm disappointed. I don't want the dad out in me to come out, but
Sure.
It is a little bit of that. And it's like, oh, not even disappointed. You didn't even lock your door. And then you posted on, Facebook and Craigslist that you were leaving for the week. And then can we please do something to make this a little harder?
Maybe favorite's the wrong word, but do you have among these groups one that might intrigue you the most? Like Russian cyber army sounds so ominous, but are some better than others at marketing, or do any of them have any technical chops, so to speak, that are worth talking about?
The Russian cyber army had the best videos, the best music, like they had music in the background, the best, almost like, which you don't see much anymore, the old anonymous videos that came out.
Yeah.
Right. And we're doing op whatever, and it would be the dude on the mask and the voiceovers and the like CNN or Fox News like overlays and graphics. And so the Russian Cyber Army Reborn really had that machismo, right? Which I appreciated. They put some pride into their effort. Oddly enough, they've kind of not went under, but their public channels have gone dark. They've changed, and you don't see a lot out of them. But we can kind of thank them for kicking off this whole frenzy in the U.S. with two water videos. These were the two towns in middle of nowhere, Texas, right, where it's the water tower, and Abernathy and Muleshoe, which I love Muleshoe as a name. Sounds very Old West. But they kind of started this off. And so there's some appreciation, at least from a training and awareness stance. The new one, though, and is Z pen testing. And funny enough, they're the ones that, I don't know, they just make me giggle. So the Arkansas City reference.
Right.
There was a news report that I believe it was a sewage treatment plant in Arkansas City, Kansas, I believe, or Oklahoma. See, now I'm going to mess up and not even know, but it was definitely not Arkansas. So they put out a news report and they said, hey, we had a ransomware attack. We're down. There was no operational impact, etc. They come on the next day and they take credit for it. And if you kind of remember back in the old days, attacks would happen and groups would take credit, but you really had no proof as to whether or not they did. So there was always that suspicion. So they get on their Telegram, they take credit. We've done, and they're very grandiose, we've done like massive financial damage to the water systems in Arkansas City. And then they post a video as proof, except the video is for a completely different water system in Malvern, Arkansas, the state. And so that just made me giggle because what is fortunate for someone as an outsider viewing these videos is for our community who's ever used an HMI, there's usually a title at the top so you know which system you're logged into.
Right.
So the Muleshoe water tower said City of Muleshoe water system. This one did not say Arkansas City water treatment. It was 2 town names in Malvern, Arkansas. And so very clearly you would go, oh, these aren't related. But, cute that they tried to capitalize on something. And that's the kind of perspective I want the listeners and the community to take away is like, oh, look at how cute they are. Look how you almost want to be demeaning because that means they're manageable. That means we can defend against them. They're not scary monsters in the night. We know something about them. We know how they operate, and we know at the level of technical capability they operate at. And so for me, that gives me confidence. The more you laugh at something scary, it means like you understand what's going on. You know what your next move is. And that's what I really want for at least this group of threat actors.
It's a good lead into my next question because I remember as you were going through each of these groups during your talk, you urged us to question everything and folks that were attending your talk, but you also had like kind of a checklist for each of these groups of questions to ask about them. And I was hoping you can go through them. Just like I'm talking about, was it targeted? Was it advanced?
Right.
Et cetera.
And that gets to the like words matter aspect. Yeah. And kind of like in Dale Peterson, S4 creator, and at his keynote even said, like, sometimes words do matter, but if certain words catch on in the industry, like, don't fight it. So it's not like a semantics argument, but when groups in authority like CISA, government, et cetera, or even industry experts say the water utility industry in the U.S. is being targeted by Iranian or Russian threat actors, when you actually look at the data or what they even present, no one was sitting up at night coming up with a playbook of, you know what, guys, let's target this small utility in, Central Texas, population 3,000 people, and make a statement. Like, nobody did that. And that's my bias, right? I'm not there with them. But these are targets of opportunity. And like with Cyber Avengers, even though our bias and focus is on, at least in the U.S. and U.S. government, which is water utilities in the U.S., they attacked a much broader range of Unitronics installations because they weren't targeting the U.S. specifically. They were targeting Unitronics because of geopolitical, things and events going on. So was it targeted? My, position with the community was, well, no. Does that mean like it didn't happen? Does that mean it wasn't an issue? Well, no, absolutely. But nobody is targeting West Pennsylvania water towers. They just happen to be online.
Yeah.
The next question was it advanced? And after kind of talking down these groups, at least my position is no, based on the videos, it's, random button pushes. And so definitely wasn't advanced. And the reason for that, me saying that, was that means our defenses or our mitigations don't need to be advanced. They're attainable. The next one was a little more, I would say, the theological, philosophical, but kind of like with breweries being critical infrastructure, we have to look at each one of these attacks and say, is this critical infrastructure? Not just critical to the 3,000 residents of Muleshoe, Texas, which I'm sure their water is critical to them, but from a national level or an industry level. And the purpose for that question is, should we be spending a lot of the resources, time, and honestly, the feedback from the community was a lot of wasted effort in having to respond to FBI calls or CISA calls, or, the CISO says, hey, what do we need to do about this joint, alert that came out? And it's like, oh, are we affecting our community in unintentional ways? Mm-hmm. And then that goes to the fourth question, was it impactful? Not necessarily from time wasted, not necessarily from does this look bad for the community, but did it have operational impact? And I included a slide because I'm an old consultant, and every good consulting slide needs to have the made up KPIs or statistics slide. So I had one in there that was like, well, if we take all the operating hours in the US for all water systems across, 152,000, by the way, which if you aren't involved in water systems is a lot until you recognize that the metrics for counting what a water system is something like any system that serves over 60 customers or some are like low number, and you go, oh my gosh. But how many operating hours did they lose due to Russian activity, at least reported? Well, it's zero. At least, as some of the quotes from city managers were like, this was a nuisance, no water was lost. We had to go out and replace that Unitronics PLC with something else. But that was the impact, the extent. So the next question for the community was, well, how many resource hours did we waste in responding to this? Mm-hmm. And that's the kind of existential crisis, right, you have on both sides, which is, this is important. It needs to be addressed, not faulting our government overlords with that. Same thing on the kind of private or the commercial side. Well, it's an important event. We're all trying to sell something, services, technology, training, awareness, whatever it is. So you have to reference it, right? Otherwise, people don't believe that these things are happening. But as a community, are we focusing on these lower level, no impact, nuisance defacement activities as something greater than they are? Because eventually we'll burn out our asset owners and our city managers. Right. And that's what
I remember you had a few examples. I think they were either from media interviews of, one guy in a water plant, all they did was waste raw water, or we had to get up at 3:00 in the morning to turn something back on or off. So, the outcomes are obviously the biggest concern. And so far we haven't seen anything substantial, thankfully.
And again, we should be thankful for that, right? Cross your fingers. Yeah. Part of the observation or the kind of observation bias that at least I admit that I have is that based on public information, they all matched a pattern, which was, log into something that's already online, push buttons, make a video, have lulls, right? Get community credit. I don't know. But then when you look at the pattern of the victimology, they all happen to be very small water utilities. You could make the leap to say that, well, then that's all that's exposed, right? I don't think that's the case at all. But I think it's the easiest for a non-local, non-English speaking threat actor to target. So in the same way, if I was to put my black hat on the weekend and want to target Russian infrastructure, I don't speak the language, I don't understand the local context, I would have to Google things maybe. And whatever was just easiest for me to do, I would do. And that may not be reflective or indicative of the current infrastructure security state, but that's what I can do. And I think that's the leading kind of KPI for this, is that this is what is easily attainable. And like we saw with NotPetya and these other kind of ransomware attacks gone wild, is First, it started with the low-hanging fruit, but then it evolved into the targeted, the more impactful attacks. And that's what I don't want for our community to feel like they've fallen behind, right? They need to know, hey, we're at that stage now. This is what we're doing. It's manageable. It's understandable. It's not what I call like the dark magic in some tome somewhere. But that's not to say that it's going to not get more advanced. So let's plan now. Let's see it for what it is. And let's start to be reflective and see what we can do about it to prevent future attacks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I think that's like the first question that comes up when you hear about these incidents where there is a defacement or something. Well, why didn't they expose these systems further? Is it just they're not capable, or are they just showing off that they have access and maybe tomorrow they'll do it? So, yeah, I mean, those are legitimate questions that, we haven't seen kind of exploited yet, but.
Yeah, why haven't they pivoted?
Yeah.
Why? Yeah, if they're not motivated financially, and I can say that because why didn't they ransomware the box, or why didn't they lock them out? So even after my talk at S4 that evening at Beer ISAC, I was pulling up the Telegram pages, and ZPenTest had accessed some water treatment facility in Carlsbad, New Mexico, and posted the video. And I was like, oh man, so let me see if it's still online, see if I can find out who owns it, send out my email that everyone ignores, which is fine. I get it. But, and not that I, Ron Fabela, logged in and checked to see if it was online. I knew of someone who did this, plausible deniability, but, that system's still online. Now, to your point, why didn't the Iranians just take it offline? So it is a weird kind of tactic, technique, procedure, or different philosophy that we're seeing out of these attackers, which is they seem to really just be doing it for the Instagram photo or the influencer play. They don't really want to disrupt anything. They just want to have fun and show off to their friends. One of my hypotheses, and it's fun because it's totally unfounded, is that I kind of see these as the JV team. Like if I was a young Iranian kid and my cousin was in the Iranian, Royal Guard doing cool hacker stuff that he couldn't talk to me about, this is what I would do to impress him, right? And so I like to couch it in that aspect because we're not seeing any of the other impacts done on even these easily accessible systems. They take their videos, they walk away, they post about it, and that's it. Which
have you ever
thankful for.
Have you ever interacted with any of these groups? And if you have, I'm just curious, like what's it been like? What do they?
So funny because I usually like to do live demos during presentations, and this is one where you're like, ooh, don't bring up that Telegram chat because you do get some funny, awkward, offensive things. But if you play that persona, just some kind of structure, they usually have a public but a non-writable, like I couldn't post to their public channels. That's where they publish their findings, their videos. But then they'll open up a chat where they will oftentimes sell their services or try to recruit. And I have a persona, and it's fun to mess and interact with them. They know oftentimes, especially when something hits the news, they'll welcome all the feds and all the journalists that have now joined the channel, right? So it's all a game, and it is sometimes fun to play the game and to poke fun at them. I did get banned from one of the channels, but it just all is kind of part of the game. And again, that kind of interaction, it's not quantifiable, but just from my gut feeling, these are just not necessarily kids, because I have teenagers. They're smarter than this. So I don't want to demean kids that are listening to the podcast, but they are just very immature, and they're having fun. They see it as fun, and almost like the old anonymous days or the old, /b/, and kind of just the trolling aspect of this is really what they're focused on.
Right. I mean, as far as like the chat rooms go and stuff, there has to be the assumption on their part that some kind of law enforcement is in there, some kind of threat intelligence person is in there. So I'm sure that the conversations are guarded to a point.
Oh, the memes are on point as well. There's actually, and it's funny. Not that I, you know, all of us want a certain amount of attention, and that's what I'm not trying to give to these folks while
Yeah.
still bringing awareness. But they do like to poke fun at researchers. There's one particular kind of feed on Twitter that has automated a little bit of this, like, hey, UserSec posted this or ransomware. So they'll poke fun at them too, like, and they'll call them out, call them names. So there is a semi-friendly back and forth between them and the law enforcement or the community of defenders,
Yeah.
and poking at each other a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
So again, the big assumption, a huge assumption, but I think that's rooted in some rational thought, is that the advanced or the real government sponsor, not just government protected or government ignored, they're not going on Telegram or Twitter boasting about their exploits.
Exactly.
And likewise, if there was a major impact, we used to see this, and we probably still do see this. There was never an admission, maybe up until Oldsmar, which was, kind of funny. You kind of said, like, "Oh, I'm surprised we didn't take a pilgrimage out to Oldsmar while we were in Tampa to kind of see the event that wasn't an event,
Yep.
perhaps." But really, the reason why Oldsmar is still referenceable for me, it was the first time I saw local sheriff, city manager come right up the next day and be like, "Yep, we were cyber attacked," and no question. Usually, you get a local news report of, "Oh, the water treatment system had an IT event." We see this with airlines a lot still. Well, there's an outage, IT outage, and you're like, IT outage? Like, what does that mean?
What does that mean?
And so, yeah, I mean, I think we're not seeing the advanced stuff being publicized because I think those two concepts go hand in hand in the same way that we don't know when special operations from a military aspect are being conducted. We'll get a book 10 years later about what happened.
Right. But that sheriff was great, though. He may not have realized he was kind of setting a great example for security practitioners in terms of how much he was, being forthright out there. But he was great. I remember him.
Yeah, I mean, it was you, me, and dozens of our friends who were watching that press release going, "Oh my gosh, like, really?" Yeah. Like, it's still not to the exposure that we think it is. It's important for us, but we are seeing that more and more. I don't know if we can thank the SEC for that, especially on the ransomware side, but folks are more willing to admit that they've been ransomware or attacked, especially once it's in the public, where before we'd never seen that before.
All right, Ron. Well, this has been great. And I got one more question for you before we go. I just love to get some just kind of high level general advice from you. I know during your talk, you really emphasized, don't hype these guys up, share as much information as you can. Just maybe if you can expand that a little bit.
Oh, sure. To close. Absolutely. So knowing that each of us have I don't want to say a critical part in our community, but I'd like to think we do. Whether you work for a vendor, an OEM, government, consultant, there were kind of two really big takeaways. One is we understand the need for marketing. We understand the need for exposure in all that we do. And knowledge and awareness is power, but not to overblow. And to, more importantly, and hopefully I met this requirement for myself, is that any piece of knowledge or intelligence that you give out, you should also give out the knowledge and procedures for how to gain that on your own. Especially in this particular topic, we're not dealing with classified information. We're not dealing with like journalistic sources where I have to protect my source. These are things that are repeatable for the layman. And I think the more that we teach that in the community and teach them how to fish, not just show them the AI generated picture of me with a fish, I think the better off the community will be. So that was number one. Number two, and this is a little bit not critical, but I think just reality with government, public-private partnership, which we heard a ton of in the past 4-8 years, is that it has to go both ways. So if the public, i.e., cyber avengers or the researchers that follow them, are leading the charge and coming to the information and the analysis first, and then we're sharing it with the government or with the community, then man, we have to get some feedback from the government and the community that this isn't just a reflection of what we told them.
Right.
So public-private partnership works both ways, and I hope that whatever that other side is, and a lot of times it's asset owners versus everyone else, that we somehow provide some value back to them. And maybe the first way of doing that, if we can't share different data, it's to share the process for how to analyze and collect that data.
Yep.
And allow them to fend for themselves where they can, because that builds confidence and that builds knowledge, and that's what we really need. We can't rely on you and me to watch Telegram every day and post to the internet that bad guys are doing bad things. We kind of need a community that's doing that for their own areas to take care of themselves. And once we do that, I think we're in a good spot. If these attacks advance, then everyone's aware, we're not catching up, and we can defend our own communities.
It's great advice. All right, Ron, I really appreciate you coming on, giving me the time, and joining the podcast today. This is really fun, and I appreciate it.
Likewise. Thank you so much.
All righty. Have a great day.